Okay, so we're going to switch gears and talk about two-sided marketplaces. And I just want to quickly introduce our panel. We're delighted to have you here. We have Kate Dickman at the end, who was the recent head of global brand marketing at Airbnb. Before that, Gap, Yahoo. Is currently an advisor to Reboot, which is our accelerator for women returning to work here, and is writing a book in her spare time, and is a mentor at GSVlabs.
Yes, that is me.
And then we have Hayden Brown. Hayden is Senior Vice President of Product and Design at Upwork. Prior to that, Elance, correct?
Odesk, actually, but
it
was both.
Elance and Odesk. And was Director of Corporate Strategy at Microsoft before that, and McKinsey, with Carlos, I guess. And then we have Kira Wampler, who is currently CMO at Lyft, and before that was with Trulia, which is Zillow, and Lytro.
It's still Trulia.
Still Trulia, but acquired by Zillow. Yeah. Okay, so that's our panel. And we're going to get started by talking a little bit about true two-sided marketplaces, which typically have a natural pull on both supply and demand. But I'm going to share a quick story of my experience with a two-sided marketplace recently that was not positive, and I want to get your response to that. I needed a room painted in my house, and somebody told me to go to Thumbtack. So I put my room on Thumbtack, and I waited patiently for my painter. And 3 days later, I get a message saying, sorry, we had no bids. So my takeaway is that you really need to build your supply chain before you build your demand. I'm curious if you would agree with that.
I'll go ahead and start. You know, I think it does depend on the business. I think there are probably some businesses that can be very supply light and then can work out demand, and they can build their supply as they continue to essentially satisfy their demand. But in general, if you think about marketplace businesses, it's about a match. It's about, I have a service that I'm offering, or somebody has a service that they're offering, and somebody wants to buy that thing, or goods or service or whatever. So it's entirely dependent on, do people successfully make the match? And that is something, we'll talk about that I think more, but how you scale up both the supply side of a business and the demand side of the business so that you have folks on both sides that are satisfied is kind of the magic of the marketplace in my mind.
Go ahead. I think totally agree on it depends on the business. And in our context at Lyft, which is very different actually than the context in the marketplace business that was Trulia, we have to match supply and demand within minutes or less. Which is very different than accumulate real estate listings and like sell them off, right, as people are looking for houses, or in the eBay context, like accumulate Pez dispensers and then you can eventually kind of sell them off, right? And so in our context, particularly because with scale comes good service levels, we have to scale both sides of the marketplace in balance at the same time.
Our experience at Odesk and now at Upwork is pretty similar. So we had to build out both the supply side and the demand side in tandem because an imbalance on either side. Either you have workers who are on the platform looking for jobs and lose interest really quickly if that demand isn't there, or clients who come and they sign up, they post that job, and they want to hire. If they're not getting a response within hours or days, then they're on to the next thing. So definitely scaling them both in tandem is important. I think managing the quality while you're doing that is actually a really important thing that hopefully we'll talk about later.
So Dan Rosenzweig this morning said that when they developed their tutoring business at Chegg, 90% of the time the goal was to have a supply equal demand. I'm curious, that's a difficult thing to make happen, especially all night long. What kind of algorithms and analytics do you employ in your business daily to try to make those two meet?
So we think a lot about utilization on the freelancer side. So I think an interesting thing for our marketplace is we have over 10 million freelancers signed up to work on Upwork. And we've come to a realization over the years that we have a much stronger business and a much better value proposition for them if we're concentrating the jobs amongst actually a small subset of those users in some cases, but that they're inordinately successful and can really build long-term careers on the platform rather than spreading all of the jobs across, everyone getting a few hours of work or a few days of work a month. People are going to be churning really quickly. So we've spent a lot of time managing, building out that supply side and making sure that we have the quality and the utilization of the people that are the best before basically giving the jobs to the next tier of people or having the next tier of people come in. So we measure utilization on freelancers in terms of hours worked and dollars earned, and we really try to make sure that our best people are maxing those numbers out. And then on the demand side, we think a lot about job posts, and for every post that a client makes, how many of those have a hire or more than one hire made against them. And so those are the two metrics on both sides where we really try to make sure they're always moving up, keeping that utilization high and making sure that the jobs are filling.
At Airbnb, this was a really interesting sort of puzzle for us because that system is largely based on trust. If you are going to put your home up for somebody else to stay in, you want essentially to be ensured that whoever's staying in your home is going to respect it. And likewise, if you are going to someone's home, you want to know that you are in a place that's safe, that is as advertised, et cetera. So there's a lot in the infrastructure that's based on trust, which means that a reputation platform matters very much in that marketplace. You are more successful to book a place if you have a good reputation, and likewise, those places that had a reputation built in were more successful with bookings. So the question for us was always, what happens when new content comes into the platform that has not been tested? So a new place to stay or someone who wants to try the infrastructure for the first time does not have reputation working for them yet. So that was where the algorithm actually did play into how that content and how those people are featured, to make sure that we were always allowing for newness in the background, that it wasn't only those people that already had a positive reputation, but that you were allowing for churn. That was something that the algorithm helped us with.
Yeah, and I would say our context is, we would be here for many days to talk about our analytics and algorithms. I mean, obviously our marketplace team is working very hard every second of every day to make the right matches on the road based on driver location, passenger location, and a whole variety of other data sets, so that the real-time matching is happening. On a more aggregate level, similarly to Upwork, our utilization is the primary metric that our COO and myself, we like to say we spend more time with each other than our families, and we finish each other's sentences because the two of us are working hand in hand to build demand and supply at the same time to accurately utilize our drivers, which is, of course, of high priority to us to keep enough supply on the road. And then on the passenger side, clearly for us, it's rides and conversion.
Great. In reading through each of your business models, it felt to me like delighting the customer was a key priority. And I know, Kate, you and I have spoken about that. Your photos were better than the competition when you first entered. And I know you're appealing to the millennial market, I believe. And similarly, you're trying to make the experience of hiring a contractor delightful. I think it even said in your LinkedIn profile. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about that. What does delighting the customer mean? How do you do it? How do you market it? And why is it important?
So we break down this problem into kind of three components. So one is the product. What's that experience when the user is actually using our product? What's the experience on the customer service side if they do have to call us or interact with an agent? How is that? And then finally, what's the outcome of the match? So they actually start working with someone. Does the client have a great experience? Does the freelancer have a great experience? And so looking at those three things, we kind of try to solve each one a little bit independently and then make sure that the whole thing works together. So on the product side, we're thinking a lot about the usability of the experience, how quickly and how frictionless is it for a user to post a job and start talking to a freelancer right away. Our goal is to get that to be within minutes. So we're doing a lot to roll out kind of not only instant matching, but also things that make sure that the freelance supply side is getting like push notifications on their phone when they get an invitation, or has access to a mobile app where they can check job status and start talking to clients right away. So we think a lot about the product experience in those types of terms. The customer service experience is probably one that everyone's familiar with. The JetBlue example. How do we make sure that even in those pain points when someone has a bad experience and they're calling us, we actually turn that into some kind of a win and they feel like they came out better and they feel like the company had their back. So that's another piece of it. And then I'll let you guys jump in with some of the others.
So with Airbnb, we kind of had some similar mechanisms in place. So there was, for example, people have been renting out rooms in their home since the beginning of time. Guest homes, this is not a new idea. This has been around all over the world for forever. What Airbnb did, though, just a tiny, tiny gesture. They went into people's homes, the founders, with their own beautiful cameras, and they took photography with a wide-angle lens. That gesture in and of itself changed how those listings looked to guests. And they were also able to attract like-minded other hosts, so people who had unusual places in their backyard or had a second home somewhere that had beautiful views. Those people were attracted to this environment because they realized that Airbnb respected and appreciated what they had to offer. So it was a tiny gesture, just literally taking the photographs and being able to book that was something that differentiated Airbnb certainly from the rest of the marketplace that was renting a home, but it also started challenging the hotel industry. Because now you got to see different places to stay, what they looked like on the inside in a way that was kind of different than what people were used to. Secondly, we started realizing that the Airbnb business, and I was in marketing, was primarily word of mouth business to begin with. If you had a home that you wanted to rent, another person would kind of only take the time to get their house ready to rent if they'd heard another good story from another host about why to do that. They either heard that it was economically worth their while or that it was interesting for them. So we started realizing that stories were our best marketing tool. And so going out and finding those people who were successful, either as folks that we recognized from the back end traveled on the infrastructure a lot, or folks that we could see booked a lot with guests, and we started going out to them and saying, let's hear your story. Can I put you on video? Can we use you as a super host? Can we understand what your hospitality standards are? Clearly you are doing something that the rest of us can learn from. So in a marketplace where you don't control your inventory, understanding what your inventory looks like, feels like, and how it operates became a very powerful marketing tool for us.
Yeah, totally. I think you're probably all familiar with the intensity of the ride-sharing category. So for us, it's absolutely critical that we differentiate along what we describe as we treat you better. So what that means is that at the core product has to be at parity. So on the passenger side, ETA, availability, price has to be close enough that you will get where you need to go safely, reliably, and affordably, but that you're willing or desire to support a company that cares about its drivers, cares about its community, and treats you well. And that's extremely important to us. We talk a lot about the Virgin America experience, that for the passenger side, if you think about flying, a lot of people choose to fly between New York and San Francisco on Virgin, even though there are multiple other choices because of the experience that they have. So we think a lot about that on the passenger side. We most recently redesigned our app almost entirely from the ground up. It took us almost 9 months to do it, over a series of thousands of interviews with customers, extensive testing, and one of the core tenets of it was start with the thumb and make it extremely easy for you to order a ride using one hand with your thumb, which I know sounds like, that seems small. It's huge, especially if you're someone who's riding multiple times a day and has multiple options for how you get around. So that's the passenger side. On the driver side, we treat you better is absolutely critical. I was just having this conversation earlier today. Our drivers are independent contractors. We cannot require them to do anything, right? So that means we can't require them to ride on our platform. We can't require them to drive at all. We can't require them to drive where we need them to drive. It all has to be about how we encourage and motivate and deeply understand them. And a really good example of this is we most recently in December launched a feature called Express Pay. And this is all based on understanding our drivers and what they're trying to achieve. And Express Pay allows a driver to cash out basically at the end of the day if they've earned at least $50. And you cannot believe the stories. I mean, I get chills thinking about the stories that we hear from our drivers about how much Express Pay has helped them, whether it's pay their rent that day, whether it's buy their kid. I mean, we did this before Christmas. We had so many drivers who were like, I was able to give my kids a bigger Christmas because right? And the only way we were able to do that is by treating our drivers and our passengers better.
You all in the last comments have talked about stories and the power of stories. How do you use those in your marketing? Do you have any concrete examples?
I mean, I think I don't think there's any marketers worth their salt who aren't using. I mean, that's what we do. Marketers are storytellers, because stories are what get people to part with their time or their money. And so for us, it's, everything from, we literally just had a Lyft driver deliver a baby in the car a few days ago. I don't recommend it, but but it happens. And it was in stark contrast to our competitor whose driver left a woman in labor on the side of the road. So that's a nice story to tell. And, we did that obviously through our social media channels and then, through our comms channels. We use storytelling extensively in our engagement channels and our newsletters. We also use stories very extensively internally. We are in a heated environment, and one of the great ways to stay focused on our vision and mission is using storytelling around what our drivers are doing, what our passengers are doing, and how everything that they do every day is changing transportation.
Yeah, just to echo that, we clearly use stories in the marketing, but internally, I think that's been one thing that really is distinct about the Upwork culture is people are really there because they care about the mission of empowering freelancers all around the world to get meaningful work. And so one thing I think we've become more conscious of as we've gone bigger is how impactful it is to bring customers into our all hands, into the office, or customer videos that we play during all hands and things like that. So people really have those moments where they can get back into that connection with the customer, and they're so inspired by the level of impact. And it's amazing because it's not like we have to go cherry pick like the one interesting freelancer and her story about coming out of poverty or whatever. It's just like everywhere on our platform, and so we really try to leverage those more to make sure that we're kind of addressing our employees' needs and excitement about why they're at the company.
And I can add, just in addition to using authentic, genuine stories in our marketing and our outbound marketing, and also bringing folks into sort of inside the environment to speak to our employees to make sure that we are all seeing and meeting for real the people who are in our infrastructure. At Airbnb, we also took it one step further, and we had these dinner parties. They were amazing, where employees would go back to your own home neighborhood, and you'd take a bunch of people out to dinner. And they were either guests or they were hosts that lived in that community, but it gave folks a chance to meet each other. And in an environment where if you are hosting in your home, you kind of know the guests that are staying with you, but you don't really know if you're up to snuff or what everybody else is doing, or who do you commiserate with as you're trying to learn how to do this better. We would just pull these people together and host these dinner parties, either in our homes or in restaurants, and we'd give everybody a chance to get to know each other. And it created this incredible sense of community. And quite frankly, also just fired up sort of the guerrilla word of mouth marketing. Now all of a sudden we have folks meeting each other, they feel special about our business and our brand, they go and talk to people about it more kindly. So it was a self-fulfilling prophecy.
You answered my next question, which we heard a lot this morning about the power of word of mouth and referrals. So I know what Airbnb did. How about Lyft and Upwork in terms of getting people to really talk about your service?
Frankly, I think this is something we actually haven't fully tapped into. Our freelancers are all over the world, and we do things like meetups, and they go out of their way to kind of find each other and create these communities both on our platform and through other social media channels. But I think there is even more of an opportunity. For example, we've thought about features like letting freelancers refer their friends to jobs that they may get invited to, but either they're not a good fit or they feel like they can't take on that extra work and they have somebody in mind who could do that work. So actually it's an area that I think this year and over the next few years we'll be investing more in to take advantage more of that word of mouth, both for freelancers and for our clients.
Yeah, and I think it states the obvious, but you get more people to recommend if you have a good product. And I'm a product of Intuit, so I know Bill spoke earlier today, and I grew up. We were just telling the story today of like the Net Promoter report would come in, and you're like spending hours poring over all the open ends and what are the surprises that you're hearing in the data. So we use quite a host of tools at Lyft to understand our product experience, our end-to-end experience, both for passengers and drivers, and look not just at the overall score, which is usually not what you want to look at, but what are the underlying variables under the score that are driving it. So what's the root cause around why is somebody is less likely to recommend or more likely to recommend, and then what are we going to do about it on the product side or the service or experience side. And then I think specifically from a marketing perspective, we have a very extensive referral channel. I think, pre my time, that was an area that we invested a lot in on the sort of the give and the get side. So if you're a passenger or driver, what do you give to people, and then what do you receive? And we've done an extraordinary amount of testing on the referral channel in our world. So it's an area of strength for us. It requires a lot of work, a lot of data, and you need a really strong engagement team and infrastructure to make it work.
One more question before I open it up. Any service recovery ideas that you've used when you haven't created that delightful experience for your customer?
I have a great one. There was a story about a family that went to stay in a hotel. And while they were in the hotel, their daughter had the stuffed animal, the lovey. And over the course of the stay, the lovey was lost. And they just didn't make it home with the lovey. And it was a giraffe. It was a stuffed giraffe. And when they got home, they, repeated calls back to the hotel. Can you please take a look for this thing? Can you please talk to the laundry service? This is really important to us. And the hotel went above and beyond, and they sent this family a stuffed giraffe. And it wasn't exactly the same one, but it was a gesture. And we heard that story, and we turned that into a verb. So we started giraffing folks. People who had bad experiences. They were on their honeymoon, and the place they were trying to stay wasn't what they hoped it would be, or they were canceled, 5 days out and were left without a place, or even that we heard that they were in a trying space in their lives and they were trying to stay somewhere, they were trying to host. We created a team. It was actually a customer relations team that would go and do something special for those folks. We called it giraffing. And then we would report back internally what the results of the giraffing were, if there was a quote or a testimonial, or if later on we heard that something great happened in those people's lives. But it was a wonderful, wonderful way to remember that these were very human experiences, and we were treating them not as a business, but rather as humans on the inside of our business. It made a big, big, big difference with respect to our connectivity to the customers.
For us, I think, people get very invested once they make a hire, and to hire somebody and not have the work done that you're hoping for is a really tough experience, and a lot of the times, has all these repercussions for our clients if the work is subpar, doesn't appear on time, because they're counting on it for their business. So we've really focused on, if a client does have a bad experience, how do we match them with another freelancer as quickly as possible who really can over-deliver on that project? And so that's an area where we've done different programs around kind of guarantees and interventions where we'll identify where things might be going south and try to actually identify using our algorithms before a contract has come to an end, before a client has even said to us that they're having a bad experience. But we can actually see and visualize on the site sometimes, like, hey, this looks like this has all the signs of something that's not going to end well. So can we intervene now, talk to the customer, and potentially match them with someone else who is going to deliver a great experience before they reach that conclusion where they've kind of lost the trust in us and felt totally let down by us and the freelancer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, there's a lot of the obvious things that you would expect us to do. Reviewing the ratings and the feedback. Following up with people based on what they've shared with us, tickets, et cetera. I think one of the areas that we're doing a lot more of is proactive. And this isn't just proactively through the customer service team, but proactive through the service itself. So for example, if a driver cancels on you, we automatically dispatch another driver. Versus, making you have to go back through the process all over again, which is quadruply annoying. I mean, it's extremely annoying to be canceled on, but it's even worse to have to then go order your own flippin' ride when we already knew what you needed to do in the first place. So that's something that I would urge you to think about, which is, what is the friction you're putting on your customers to fix their own problems when you actually have the data and the tools to be able to fix it for them. And I think for us, again, in an environment that's extremely, very, very time sensitive for our passengers, removing as much of that friction as possible is really critical.
Great insights. Any questions? Yeah.
So with respect to supply acquisition, what's tough with two-sided marketplaces, if you try to measure the ROI of supply acquisition, there's also a demand side that you pay for. How do you think about if you're double counting acquisition, double assigning the value on the acquisition if you paid for supply acquisition, that sale, you may have already paid for the person on the other side of the sale. So how do you think about if you're double counting when you're measuring your ROI for supply versus demand, I guess?
I mean, I'll jump in because we debated this actively and then we just made it simple, which is that we assign 50-50 value to both sides. And I understand Airbnb does the same thing because we ask them.
I was going to say that there are different teams at Airbnb that are doing both sides, and but there's sort of management of the health of both sides at all times.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm not there anymore, so I can't speak to what they're doing today, but we were always looking after, are we in balance? And if one side is over-rotating, how can we help fix that, or how can we get the balance back?
We focus 99% of our efforts actually on demand-side acquisition right now. We get 30,000 signups a week from freelancers without doing any marketing at all. So really, we've never had that attribution problem. It's really focused on the client side.
You volunteered to kind of go with something people are already doing, but present a system and a way of doing it that at the early days was like totally foreign to people. And so I'm curious because we're a small company that's doing that as well. And there's both kind of a B2B side and a B2C side of what we're doing. If you have any thoughts on, especially with marketing, what are the most important things to get right at that early stage when it's a good idea and they're already doing it in some way, but it's uncomfortably different from the habits they've got? They're actually working against them. Any thoughts you have in guidance on that?
I think one thing we've thought a lot about is if the end user is really motivated and they can see the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the benefit they're going to get, they will jump through all kinds of hoops in terms of a long and uncomfortable registration form, or ask them to do things that maybe aren't natural if they really understand that end value that they're going to receive. If they don't, you can make the process really easy and yet they're still not going to do it. So I think we've really focused on how do we articulate upfront what we can offer and telling stories and doing some of that work to make sure people feel like they really can see themselves benefiting from our offering in order to then take those necessary risks with us in terms of changing their habits.
And I know this is a little bit of a cliche in sort of early stage world, but I do think it's important to think about what are the things you can do early that may not scale, but are still really important. And so, and I think that one of the classic examples is the photo taking on Airbnb. But for example, at Lyft, when John and Logan started, they met every single driver in person before the driver became, joined the platform. Obviously, that does not scale when you move outside of San Francisco. It doesn't scale in San Francisco, let alone when you move. But it was so critical to them that the first experience that you had on the Lyft platform was a good experience, that they wanted to feel great about the quality of the drivers. So when they realized that like, hey, an in-person meeting is actually a critical step in the process, we obviously cannot meet every driver. They built out what we describe as the mentor program. So our top 10% of drivers across the country meet every single applicant before the applicant becomes part of the platform. They do the 17-point vehicle inspection, they review the documents, they do a test ride, a practice ride, if you will. They pass down, right, Lyft lore, and the mentor can yay or nay the person on the platform. And as you can imagine, in a world where supply is a huge challenge, that's a lot of power to give to the mentor. But it's a big part of how we deliver a great quality experience, even at scale. And it started from this idea of that, hey, people are going to be getting in strangers' cars. That was not common, right? And we want them to have a great first experience. And so how do you do that? You make sure that those drivers are really high quality.
And I think one final add-on to all of this is that from a marketing standpoint, you're trying to figure out what's going to be persuasive, and especially if you have an obstacle. Either you've got a paradigm shift, or there's something about what you're doing that's different. We've said this already, but I would say go back to the customers. Learn what got them to take the leap with you. Understand what they enjoyed, what was scary about it, and use that. Use them, as testimonials, because they're proof that it works. Or secondly, use that as insight to figure out what you'd put in the product or in your messaging to help people get over the hump. but they probably have a lot of information at their fingertips that will be exactly what you need to be persuasive for the next generation.
I read a story about the beginnings of Airbnb and kind of the rocky start, and they went for VC money and everybody turned them down and they couldn't get it working, and it was almost by a stroke of luck that they actually they caught fire. And I'm wondering if you could look at that in hindsight, were there sort of big mistakes that were done? Because bootstrapping a two-sided market is always tricky, right? And I have in my particular case, I'm doing a three-sided market, which is even trickier than two-sided. But even for two-sided, it's any kind of, hey, looking back, we should have done this, or we should have done this, or or do you just end up getting lucky and suddenly catch fire, and sometimes that's the luck can play a huge role.
Yeah. There's a famous quote, and it's one of my favorite, about the founding of Airbnb, that one of their investors said to the three founders, "You know what I like about you guys? You're like cockroaches. You just won't die." I think that says a bit about their stamina. I mean, they had an idea, and room after room said, "I don't really get it. Are you sure? Is that really going to be a big idea?" And they said, "Look, we've witnessed it firsthand. We are the original hosts. We did this in our living room. There is a market for this. We're sure of it." So I think what I'm going to share there is, I think a little bit of conviction helps you along, helps you through the bad meetings, because it may just be that you need to have two good meetings and a little bit of quorum to sort of get a bit of momentum. And then secondly, I think you can't do everything. In a marketplace, you can't do everything. I joke that marketplace businesses are a little bit like middle children. You're trying to make everybody happy. And it's hard because you're trying to figure out at all times, who are you satisfying and when and where and why. You need to have very good analytics to understand where your business is. And then you need to essentially take some bets. When I joined Airbnb, we took a look at the business and we said, look, what marketing can do in addition to our organic growth is try to spread the word. So we're going to handle supply. I know this is a business that needs both. I know we really, really value our hosts. They're a critical part of our business. We are hosts ourselves. Many people who work inside the company are hosts and guests and the platform, so everybody's a little bit of everything. But we said, from a marketing standpoint, the people that we are going to try to find, or we're going to help try to grow the business, is going to be on the guest side. And that's where we're going to spend our energy. And it was a tough move. It made really a lot of people nervous to say, we're going to pick a lane. But it was a choice that we made. So I'll say that too. I think there's some tough choices that have to be made.
I think what I'd add is I think sometimes it's really easy to look at these stories and say, like, of course it was going to work out. Or to look at some of these stories and be like, oh yeah, overnight, they just came out of nowhere. I mean, John and Logan are in their early 30s, and they have been working on transportation for more than half of their lives. I mean, Logan was the youngest member of the Santa Barbara County Transportation Board when he was an undergrad. I mean, he's that passionate about transportation. And those guys were, working on Zimride, which was the long distance car sharing service, for I think 7-8 years before they built the Lyft app. And so I reflect on that a lot when you read the press, and it's like, they came out of nowhere. And I'm like, there's maybe a startup, like I think like Instagram, is like 9 months to $1 billion. And everyone else looks that way, except under the hood is like, 7 to 10 years. So I don't know if that's heartening or not, but I do think that what that means is that it's a lot more hard work than it is luck. And things only look lucky because of what's put in the press.
Yeah, I'd second that.
As someone who heads up comms.
Yeah. I mean, Elance was founded in '99, Odesk in 2003, 2004 in its current model, and so it's taken us a while to get to, over $1 billion in gross services last year. But it's been, a hard slog with a lot of people working really hard and not giving up.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.